Good afternoon. It's Friday the 21st of April 2023. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me in the studio today, Patrick Henningsen, as usual. Welcome to the programme, Patrick.
Great to be with you, Mike.
And we've got Vanessa Beeley joining us from Damascus via video link, also as usual for Friday. So let's get kicked off with the news of Dominic Raab. He's decided to resign. Here he is. I resign, he said. Let's see what he actually said. He tweeted out his resignation statement at about 10 o'clock this morning. I'm writing to resign from your government, he wrote to Rishi, following receipt of a report arising from the inquiry conducted by Adam Tully KC. I called for the inquiry and undertook to resign if it made any findings of bullying whatsoever. I believe it is important to keep my word. It's a privilege, blah, 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 and so on. But the next paragraph was more important. While I feel duty bound to accept the outcome of the inquiry, it dismissed all but two of the claims leveled against me. So he's trying to say that he's not a bully at all. I also believe its two adverse findings are flawed and set a dangerous precedent for the conduct of good government. First, ministers must be able to exercise direct oversight with respect to senior officials over critical negotiations conducted on behalf of the British people. Otherwise, the democratic and constitutional principle of ministerial responsibility will be lost. This was particularly true during my time as Foreign Secretary in the context of Brexit negotiations over Gibraltar, when a senior diplomat breached the mandate agreed by the cabinet. So he's attempting to justify his position. But look, other than the distraction that it is, there is an important point here, and that is that since Tony Blair, the relationship between ministers, secretaries of state, and civil servants has changed. And this idea of collective responsibility and ministerial responsibility was more or less lost from that point because policy became, rather than the decision of the minister, the decision of the civil servants. And the minister's role purely is to sell that policy to the public these days. But I don't know what your thoughts are.
I'm just wondering if this is some Tory Machiavellian elimination exercise because somebody's challenging for somebody's leadership position or some power dynamic going on within the Machiavellian Conservative Party. What do you think?
It's very possible. I mean, it is very possible. I don't really quite grasp it. Anyway, we'd lost our Deputy Prime Minister, and it's a real shame. I'm extremely sorry, as I'm sure everybody can tell. But anyway, let's get on to some better news. And here is Children's Health Defence. JFK Jr. launches his presidential campaign, vows to reduce chronic disease in children. So this, of course, was on Wednesday. Kennedy, Children's Health Defence founder and chairman on leave, spoke for nearly 2 hours and covered a wide range of issues, everything from his family's history in American politics to the military-industrial complex to widespread censorship and to the attacks on civil liberties, the environment and public health. So let's just have a look at a short clip here from the first couple of minutes of, or first minute or so at least, of his announcement.
I've come here today to announce my candidacy for the Democratic nomination for President of the United States. My mission over the next 18 months of this campaign and throughout my presidency will be to end the corrupt merger of state and corporate power that is threatening now to impose a new kind of corporate feudalism on our country, to commoditize our children, our Purple Mountain's majesty, to poison our children and our people with chemicals and pharmaceutical drugs, to strip mine our assets, to hollow out the middle class and keep us in a constant state of war.
Okay, so Patrick told me that I said JFK Jr. there. I do apologize for that. Of course, that was Robert F. Kennedy Jr. So just to clarify that. But I don't know what your thoughts are on that. It's getting a fairly positive response in the chat box for sure.
Well, we knew he was gonna announce his run, and he was likely gonna do it. But it's one thing to say it and think it, and it's another thing to see him there with Kennedy 2024. And as you can imagine, Mike, and I think for British people as well, the entire Anglophone world, that there's a bit of an emotional attachment to that because of the JFK issue. Is so emotive. A lot of people believe that history took a wrong turn after the assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy. And of course, Robert F. Kennedy's Jr.'s father, Robert Kennedy, was running for president in '68 and was assassinated as well. So it is an emotional thing. I think it really resonates with a lot of people in America, just on a basic level. Now, to get to the reality of party politics, that's another question. So here's the thing. Joe Biden's been waffling about confirming whether he's going to run for a second term.
Right.
He keeps dragging his heels. Oh, we're not sure yet. He's babbling, mumbling, and things like that. His wife is doing apology interviews for him, not confirming. So why is this? Now RFK has jumped in the race. Now Biden has to say, they have to say something really soon. And I think the reason they were dragging their feet is because they have a replacement for Biden, who they will bring in at a later date. But they don't want to announce it too early because some other Democrats might come in and want to challenge as well. And the Democrats like a nice, tidy, fixed race. So they'll allow for some plurality. But at the end of the day, the DNC always chooses ahead of time, whether it's Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden, who is going to be their candidate. They'll go through the motions, make it look like it's a fair game. But so I think this is going to put pressure on the White House. And Joe Biden's a lame duck. So all of the legislation, everything that he wants to do as a president, as soon as he says he's not running, he's a lame duck, and it will really weaken the legislative efforts of whatever the Democrats think they can do in the next 18 months.
Right.
So this is really massive. Now the attacks have already started. And anti-vaxxer, Robert F. Kennedy, the headlines are really shameful, Mike. Anti-vaxxer and conspiracy theorist RFK announces he's running for a Democratic nomination. So it's just going to be one after another. They'll find sex scandals. They'll drag out old Kennedy family members who don't like him, saying bad things about him. But look, the people who support Trump resonated with a lot of what RFK said in that speech. And there's a lot of Democrats that feel totally disenchanted and feel left out of the process and ignored. There's a lot of Republicans as well that are sort of more, moderate centrist Republicans. They're going to resonate with JFK, even if
RFK.
You did it to me.
Yeah, I did it to you.
It's contagious. So they're going to resonate with his message. So what does that mean? That means that 6%, what Jill Stein got in 2016, that was enough to potentially swing the election to Trump. So, whatever, if he goes independent, if he stays in the race, they're probably going to railroad him out during the primaries. Okay. But if he stays in for the distance, he could actually be the game changer. Donald Trump could also offer him a vice presidential ticket. That's not completely out of the realms of possibility, considering how cutthroat and cannibalizing the Republican Party currently is.
Do you think he would accept?
It has happened before. The last unity ticket was Abraham Lincoln and Andrew Johnson.
Yeah, but what I mean is, would he accept an offer from Trump? Would he?
I'm sure he would. I'm positive he would. It would be some kind of a unity ticket. This happened after the Civil War, by the way. So it has happened. And America's in a very tumultuous situation right now, Mike. So I wouldn't rule anything out. So it's going to be interesting. There's going to be a lot of twists and turns coming, a lot of unexpected truth bombs and scandals that are going to be dropped as well. But, and Gavin Newsom, that could be the replacement for Biden. Kennedy is a very good contrast to Newsom. But it means that the vaccine issue can be raised now. And it's going to actually put pressure on Trump to address Operation Warp Speed, because that's a sore point with Trump supporters.
And just as a final comment, I did notice no teleprompter.
No teleprompter. So
when Joe Biden can do that, maybe that would qualify him a bit more to be president for a second term.
So that was impressive. So it was from the heart. That was one of the best political speeches I've ever heard in my life. It's probably in the top 3.
Yeah.
So I was very impressed. So we'll see how things develop.
So stop the 9/11 cover-up is, and the question is it a false flag?
Okay, so there's been a breakthrough in the 9/11 story, and this is something that has been lingering for many weeks, but is now sort of coming into view. So the question is it a false flag? So there hasn't 22 years since 9/11. There's been no breakthroughs, and finally we have something that looks like it could be significant. We'll see. So what happened here? These are basically the public defenders of the 9/11 suspects that are detained currently in Guantanamo Bay. And they're being defended by a Pentagon-appointed group of a committee of public defenders. It's called the Military Commissions Defense Organization. And so what have they unearthed here? So this is a court filing by the Guantanamo Military Commission, reveals possible CIA involvement in the violation of U.S. law in the 9/11 attacks. So the details are here. Nice Twitter thread here, all credit to the Mises caucus there, the Mises Institute. And so what are sort of the main points here? Look at this. So documents show a relationship between terrorists, Saudi intelligence services formed by the CIA with their officers through a group they call the Safari Club, a secret alliance of nations the CIA uses to conduct unlawful operations. And there's more. The CIA assigned officers, they had to find ways to blame the FBI for the attacks. The CIA tried to hide that they were aware of the relationships between the hijackers and Al-Qaeda because they were running a, quote, false flag operation. So you can see how this is getting into the gray areas here of clandestine tradecraft. Pretty fascinating, isn't it? But here's where it gets interesting. The UBL station was allegedly tasked with building informants inside Al-Qaeda, but it was ran in a way that would make that nearly impossible, possibly because analysts secretly already had men on the ground and were not disclosing it as part of a hidden operation, even within the CIA. So these are, cells within intelligence services here, the Russian doll syndrome. So despite outcry from the agencies at the station and an awareness of the danger to a, quote, stop, was not authorized to prevent the hijackers from entering the country. FBI command ordered agents to, quote, stand down in their investigations of the hijackers. So this is very similar to the 1993 World Trade Center bombing,
right,
which was exposed through with a confidential FBI informant. The bombs were supposed to be dummies. The FBI was managing the whole process along the way. So I see some overlap here. And so this is to me, very credible. This could very easily be spun into a little bit of a psyop, as the US government would like very much to cover this up or minimize what is being said here by the witnesses.
Right.
Okay, so this isn't a slam dunk. This is only a court filing, but I'm saying it's very revealing. We didn't show you all the details, by the way. Those are just some of the highlights, but it does corroborate things that we've said on this program and things that I myself have written about and other people have covered over the years. That is, this 9/11 had a U.S. intelligence clandestine element to it. And so that's not to say how 9/11 happened, how the Twin Towers came down. That's a separate conversation.
Right.
We're talking about these so-called Saudi hijackers. Now, who do they have in Gitmo, Mike? Obviously not the pilots flying the planes. So we're told. So not the hijackers themselves, but those who worked with them or their accomplices. So take that and sort of make a mental note of that, because that's may or may not be credible in some people's eyes, because how is this information, how have they gleaned it? Under duress, waterboarding? So it's early days. I think this is a significant opening, though, and certainly it's going to drive the conspiracy realms crazy.
Okay, well, we'll keep an eye on it then. So let's move on to Ukraine. And I just wanted to start off with this, the latest defense intelligence update, because it's just another disgraceful piece of text. Soft ground conditions, according to the Ministry of Defense, are the biggest problems across most of Ukraine. Severe mud is likely slowing operations on both sides of the conflict. However, Russian online outlets are likely exaggerating the overall impact of mud on Ukrainian forces as part of an information operation aimed at raising Russian morale and undermining Ukraine supporters in light of an anticipated Ukrainian counteroffensive. Is that likely or not? I think it's not very likely that that's what they're doing.
Well, this is what they're putting out. What's the real question? Yeah, how credible is the defense intelligence updates from the UK? What's their track record like? Have they been? What's their batting average, as they say in America?
Pretty low.
So I don't know.
Pretty low.
I take it all with a pinch of salt coming out of that.
But where does that take us? It takes us on to the Pentagon leaks, and well, this continues to garner reactions, Patrick.
Sure. Here's the real reactions that we like to see. Reactions from lawmakers, legislators. Matt Gaetz, congressman from Florida, introduces a new resolution, House resolution, privileged resolution, to force President Biden and Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin to transmit all documents on deployed U.S. troops in Ukraine. That was one of the big takeaways, was the confirmation that there were 100-odd U.S. Special Forces in a combat capacity on the ground in Ukraine. So that was part of the Pentagon Leaks, and we covered that last week. So here's the result of this. They want an audit. They want to know who's in there, what they're doing in Ukraine, how long they've been there, and so forth. So this is going to be interesting. Whether this is going to get any traction with the rest of the House is maybe not, maybe doubtful. But you can see things are moving after these Pentagon leaks. That's a very important signal. Very important signal indeed. So think about that. And also, here's Peter Hitchens' recent article here. Why are the SAS in Ukraine? And why do we have and do we have a clue why we're involved in this war? So for the Mail on Sunday, interesting. So you've reported on this before, haven't you?
On the fact that the SAS is in Ukraine, yes. So the Pentagon leaks certainly suggested that the UK had the largest number of special forces operating in Ukraine at 50, and actually the United States was quite a few down the list. So we were well out in front on that. So I hadn't seen this article from Hitchens.
Yeah. So it's good to see. So the questions are being asked here, and certainly they're not going to stop. And at the same time, this has also surfaced here. A group of Republican lawmakers have sent this letter to the President of the United States, and this is what they're saying: unrestrained U.S. aid for Ukraine must come to an end, and we will adamantly oppose all future aid packages unless they are linked to clear diplomatic strategy designed to bring this war to a rapid conclusion. I like the sound of that. I don't know about you. There's the signatures, and there's some familiar faces on there. Senator Mike Lee, Senator Rand Paul from Kentucky, Andy Biggs, Paul Gosar, Arizona. And Matt Gaetz, of course, again, no surprise there. So that's those senators and House members, Congress members. So not a bipartisan letter, but nonetheless, you have a fairly strong anti-war contingent built into the Republican Party, remnants of the old Freedom Caucus. J.D. Vance as well, freshman senator from Ohio. So this is, I think this is overall very encouraging. We'll see how much purchase it gets.
Okay, and that takes us to this.
So I just wanted to point out, if people will go, this is an amazing overview here. The Ukraine crisis in context, Brzezinski's grand chessboard in the 21st century. And this is by Dr. Jean Eremtin, and he's a Turkish scholar, and his work on this is incredible. So he pretty much breaks it down how we got to this point to begin with, and how this is just a continuation, a gradual continuation of U.S. policy, U.S. grand strategy over the last few decades. So from administration to administration, he shows there's been absolutely no change in the U.S. Orientation towards Ukraine and Russia on this. And there are plans and there are intentions to break up Russia or to make it into a failed state. So you'll see the receipts are in that article. So I encourage people to get it, share the link as well. It's an excellent read.
Okay, so if this open letter from the senators is asking for the U.S. to stop aid to Ukraine, what's the U.S. administration's response to that? Well, here it is. This is from Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Additional U.S. security assistance for Ukraine. Let's just see what he had to say. Pursuant to a delegation of authority from President Biden, I'm authorizing our 36th drawdown of U.S. arms and equipment for Ukraine, valued at $325 million. This security assistance package includes more ammunition for U.S.-provided HIMARS and artillery rounds, as well as anti-armor systems, small arms logistics support vehicles, and maintenance support essential to strengthening Ukraine's defenders on the battlefield. Now, of course, when he says maintenance support there, he's talking about US servicemen providing maintenance support on the ground.
Sure.
Yeah. So what happens then if the United States sends Patriot missiles to Ukraine? How many US staff go along with those?
Lots and lots and lots more. Not only that, you've got the whole supply chain for the Patriot missile batteries. You've got engineering, you've got maintenance, you've got ordnance. You're talking about a huge contingent of U.S. forces, and those are going to be likely around someone like Kiev, for instance, or maybe Lviv as well. This does dovetail to what we said last week. Is the final card going to be a play to create a no-fly zone or a safe zone in Western Ukraine? So we'll see.
So Jens Solberg then, over the last day or two, was in the Czech Republic, meeting the Czech president, Petr Pavel. There they are. They look very handsome together. But let's just look and listen to what Petr Pavel said, a very brief comment here with respect to Russia, and we get an idea of what the thinking is within NATO.
I'm happy that we all understand that there is no alternative to supporting Ukraine, because alternative to it is success of Russia. And that would mean many more problems for us, potentially even more serious than we face today. So support of Ukraine is a must, and we have to be consistent in maintaining sufficient public support in our countries, explaining people what kind of threat we would face if we stop supporting Ukraine.
So that was quite an incredible comment. You know, if basically they're saying there can be no peaceful solution to this problem, with that Russia cannot be allowed to continue to be as powerful as it is, and they've got to do everything that. So, you know, what can we say now? On Wednesday's program, Brian asked the question, "Where is Ben Wallace?" And well, it turns out he was in the United States over the last couple of few days, meeting. Who is this?
Austin
Powers. Yeah, right. Okay.
That's my pet name.
Yes, I know.
Lloyd
Austin. Yeah,
he's our defense secretary.
Indeed, and he was also meeting General Mark Milley to discuss a range of defense and security issues of mutual concern, including support for Ukraine in this war, and NATO and AUKUS, of course, as well. But he didn't end there. He flew from the United States over to Switzerland, where he was signing defense agreements there. But don't worry, Patrick, because those, whatever documents they were signing there, and we don't know the specific details of them, they are honoring Swiss military neutrality. I'm not quite sure how you do that when you're signing defense agreements with countries, that if you're a neutral country. But you know, we're starting to see countries that have traditionally had neutrality, like Switzerland and Ireland, seeming to move away from that position, and it's probably not the best.
So they're using Ukraine, using this crisis to
100%.
Drag the last neutral countries. What's left after that? Austria? Is there anyone left besides that in Europe? No.
I don't think so, no.
Not really.
No.
Interesting.
So we'll see. Okay, well, let's move to the Middle East and welcome Vanessa to the program. Vanessa, what's been going on in Turkey?
Yeah, in Turkey, well, last week, of course, we were talking about the potential for the meeting of the defense ministers, the foreign ministers, and even potentially the President Assad of Syria. Of course, his red line was that Turkey should remove all military presence, including the extremist armed groups under their control, from Syria, and return Syrian territory to the status quo pre-2011. And last week, Turkish officials were a lot more conciliatory, but I did talk about the potential for US interference in the Iranian-Russian brokered peaceful resolution between Turkey and Syria. And in fact, it happened very shortly after last week's program. So suddenly here, we have Erdogan doing another kind of U-turn, which is a familiar sort of element of his presidency. He comes out with a statement, and this is reported in the Cradle: Turks cannot feel safe with PKK, which is, of course, the US-backed equipped, armed Kurdish Contras in northern Syria and Iraq. But then if we just move on, Mike. So basically, Erdogan on the 17th of April said that his people cannot feel safe in the first place in the presence of a terrorist organization, which is kind of ironic as he's been funding terrorism in Syria since the beginning of the war against Syria and was training terrorist groups in Turkey. In the presence of an organization in northern Syria and Iraq equipped with air and ground weapons. Now, those air and ground weapons are supplied by another NATO member state, namely the United States. That was reported by Sputnik. He then says, we have shown our determination in this context time and time again, thanks to our continuous operations within our borders and our cross-border operations, which I would say, I mean, if you remember in 2014, Serena Shem was most probably murdered by Turkish intelligence agencies because she was reporting on the Turkish border being used to transport weapons, terrorist fighters, and even chemical weapon ingredients. He says, then we have made it clear that our country cannot live side by side with terrorism, but he will finance it in Syria. We will never retreat from this position, and while we take all these steps, we will not make any concessions at all. Very strong language from Erdogan here, and as I said, a complete U-turn on the language he was using prior to the US got involved in the negotiations, which I'll show in a second. But what is also interesting here, so his big bugbear, if you like, are the Kurdish factions that are under the control of the US in the north and northeast of Syria. But this is from the article that I mentioned last week by Seda Karan for The Cradle. But Erdogan's most striking move to expand his alliance came with Hudapar, which political pundits linked to the so-called Turkish Hezbollah or Kurdish Hezbollah, a deep state-backed movement that carried out terrorist attacks in the southeast of Turkey in the late 80s and 90s. Sometimes confused with the Shia Lebanese Hezbollah. Hezbollah means basically party of God. The Lebanese resistance organization, the Turkish movement, is the polar opposite. It is instead heavily steeped in the ideology of Sunni Kurdish religious extremists, which are also operating in Idlib alongside al-Qaeda. So this just demonstrates the hypocrisy, both from the US and from Turkey. And let's have a look at why Turkey might suddenly be changing their rhetoric on Syria. The US has suddenly agreed a $259 million deal of F16 equipment sale to Turkey. And if we move on, we'll see the details of that. This is from a Reuters article. So US President Joe Biden's administration notified Congress on Monday of the planned sale to Turkey of avionics software upgrades for its current fleet of F-16 fighter aircraft, a deal valued up to $259 million. The deal, first reported by Reuters, moves ahead with the sale of the modernization package for Turkey's aircraft after leaders of US congressional committees gave informal approval. So one assumes that that approval can be rescinded at any moment. And then guess what? Turkey is a long-standing and valued NATO ally, a State Department spokesperson said in a statement. So therefore, they're bringing in the NATO card. They're putting pressure on Turkey to pivot back to NATO after he was showing signs of pivoting towards Russia and Iran. And then it goes on, Mike, in the last section from the article. The F-16 modernization deal follows Turkey approving Finland's accession to the NATO military alliance and signs of easing tensions between Turkey and neighbor Greece ahead of Turkish elections next month. So again, that gives you an idea of why Turkey suddenly approved Finland's accession. Of course, Lockheed Martin Corps will be the principal contractor on the deal. And then importantly here, the smaller package was approved after the administration pushed the lawmakers to approve it to send a positive signal to Ankara, according to one source familiar with the deal. So I think that completely corroborates what I suspected, that the US is trying to step in and muscle Russia and Iran out of the way and to bring an end to any idea of normalization with Syria. Then if we have a look also at Turkey's main opposition to Erdogan and their foreign policy, this is Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, and I'm not going to repeat that name. But if we move on, we'll see a few of the points that they make in their manifesto. It's interesting that Erdogan and his party have not yet produced a manifesto for the election, which is looming. So according to this report in Al Monitor, the opposition alliance led by the main opposition, CHP, Republican People's Party, pledges to fix the muddle that Turkish foreign policy has become. In a joint policy document, it says its foreign policy will be based on Ataturk's adage. Of course, Erdogan is renowned for basically overturning much of Ataturk's very popular policy in Turkey. Peace at home, peace in the world, and adhere to universal values and international law, free of ideological considerations. The opposition pledges to maintain ties also with Russia, although in the paragraph before that it was talking about strengthening ties with NATO. So again, it's trying to keep the balance between NATO and the new Eastern Bloc that is coming into power, based on a balanced and constructive dialogue on an institutional level. Quite interesting language there. Reference Syria, the opposition pledges to work for the safe return of Syrian refugees as soon as possible, which is a major point for the election campaign on all sides, because the 5 million Syrian refugees are a destabilizing influence for Turkish people. It stresses respect for the territorial integrity and sovereignty of all regional countries and non-interference in their domestic affairs, but falls short of outlining a roadmap for normalization with Damascus. It promises intense contacts and dialogue with Damascus and opposition representatives, barring militant groups, to help peace efforts in Syria, but says nothing about how it would handle the armed rebel in inverted commas, groups that Ankara has backed. And meanwhile, of course, while the US is trying to derail any peace talks between Turkey and Syria, as I keep repeating, brokered by Russia and Iran, what is the US doing? The US is increasing the attacks by ISIS, particularly in areas in the central desert area of Syria to the east of Homs and close to Palmyra, which of course was taken by ISIS twice during the height of the conflict. This is taken from my Substack summary of what's going on. So the US continues its murder of civilians in central Syria using ISIS proxies. On the 16th of April, at least 26 civilians were massacred in an attack on truffle hunters in the Drizen eastern countryside of Hama. It's reported by the anti-Syrian government Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, SOHI, also funded by the EU, that 12 of the martyrs were members of the National Defense Forces, but majority of the attacks and kidnapped victims are civilians. The US is known to have planted ISIS cells in the area east of Homs, and the threat to civilians or military is high. Syrian civilians, of course, trying to eke a living in a country under economic attack from the West, are forced to hire military protection to survive. Added to this, of course, the desert is also still littered with ISIS and other terrorist group mines and IEDs. On the 17th of February, 53 people were killed in Homs, Al-Sukna region near Palmyra, and dozens were kidnapped. And according to local sources, 139 citizens have been murdered since the start of 2023, the majority actually since the double earthquake on the 6th of February. And if you include military martyrs, the death toll stands at an estimated 289. A kilo of truffles, just to give you the idea, on the Syrian market costs between $22 to $65, bearing in mind that most people are earning less than $20 per month at the current inflation rate. And therefore, in such an economic depression, the risks are taken by civilians who would otherwise starve under US sanctions and siege. And of course, this is all part of the ongoing US and UK war of terror against the Syrian people.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for that, Vanessa. Brilliant. Right, let's come on back to the UK and, well, AI weapon systems, because many people will not know that there is an artificial intelligence in weapons systems committee in the House of Commons. It's a select committee. They've been holding evidence on development and impact of AI weapons. So they held yesterday the third public evidence session on this. It didn't get any coverage at all in the mainstream media. I haven't had a chance to watch all of it yet, but I was just fascinated, first of all, by the people that are taking part. So if we just put that back on screen for a second, we've got Courtney Bowman, who's Global Director of Privacy and Civil Liberties Engineering at Palantir, because Palantir have a good reputation for data privacy and so on, don't they?
I don't know. Can't be great.
Not really. James Black, Assistant Director of Defense and Security Research Group at RAND Corporation, RAND Europe, sorry, and Professor Kenneth Payne, Professor of Strategy at King's College London, and Dr. Keith Deere, who's Director of Artificial Intelligence Innovation at Fujitsu Defense and Security. So they were giving evidence on this. This is part of an overall evidence session, which they're, or a call for evidence, rather, that they're entitling How Should Autonomous Weapons Be Developed, Used and Regulated? Now, many people will think that this kind of thing is many years away, autonomous weaponry, making decisions about what it's going to do. But we've been reporting over the last couple of years already, the UK equivalent of DARPA and so on, spending quite a lot of money in this area to develop swarms of boats and swarms of drones and so on. This is not that far away to being some kind of limited reality. We're not quite talking Terminator here, but nonetheless, if you've got swarms of drones, we're already seeing drones in Syria and in Ukraine being used to drop bombs and so on that are operating. If we're seeing swarms of them operating in an autonomous manner, that is a massive step forward. So they're concerned about the ethics of this. I think this topic needs to get a bit more coverage than it has been.
Well, in terms of AI and military, Mike, I don't think this would be the most pressing issue. I think it would be cyber warfare, right? That would be the main battlefield. And they're already talking about this in America, about the danger of, when you lay an agent on top of an AI, like some of the advanced chat GPTs, so literally an autonomous an agent that's assigned to that and has been given instructions and can work autonomously. DDoS attacks, around the clock, 24/7 denial of service attacks can knock out all sorts of stuff. So this is a big worry right now. I think Elon Musk has also commented on this general area with AI. But I mean, if the government's not having major discussions and inquiries right now on just the general artificial intelligence issue, I think that's shocking if the government's not already ahead of the game on that. So,
they're more keen to promote it. But anyway, okay, if you like what the UK Column does, if you'd like to support us, please head over to community.ukcolumn.org. There are options to help us out there. You could pick something up at the UK Column shop, but please do share material you find on the various platforms, especially ukcolumn.org and ukcolumnextracts.co.uk. Quick reminder, Scottish Vaccine Injury Group Unity Rally taking place in Glasgow tomorrow at 1 p.m. That's at Buchanan Gallery Steps with some interesting speakers. I just wanted to also mention that on Wednesday we mentioned the WHO Pandemic Treaty, Our Fundamental Freedoms at Risk. This was a presentation being given at the European Parliament by Dr. Sylvia Berendt, David Bell, Philip Cruz, and Wolfgang Wodarg, supported by Children's Health Defence Europe. And we said that would be streamed out on the Parliament website. Well, in fact, they decided in the afternoon that it wouldn't be after all. So they didn't want that particular presentation going out on their particular live streaming platform. I can't imagine why.
Also censorship by the European Union?
Never.
Really? So I want to announce as well, or just to remind people, Mike, that I said I was going to be speaking at an anti-war rally in Trafalgar Square tomorrow, April 22nd, Saturday, and I'm not speaking, definitely not speaking at that event. Yeah. So I just wanted to mention that. If you do go or you're expecting that I might be speaking, it's not happening. I've had to cancel for personal reasons. Okay,
thanks, Patrick. Okay, let's move on to Fauci.
Well, a little feel-good story, because who doesn't like this? Twitter Files, latest installment. Fauci lied under oath. So they finally caught Fauci lying under oath. There's probably a few other times he did it as well here. You can go check this out. This is just a summary here at Zero Hedge, but let's look at the Twitter Files themselves here. great work by Paul Thacker, along with Matt Taibbi and some of these other journalists. And mind you, they're also doing this. They're not being paid to do this. Obviously, if they're making income off their Substack or whatever, whoever they're writing for, that's one thing. But Musk is not paying any of these journalists to do this. Very important point. So Twitter files, Fauci Pharma files, they're calling this one, and they're quite substantive. So here, Elon Musk has tweeted out, you remember back in December, my pronouns are prosecute Fauci. Well, you might actually get a chance here. So Fauci's been maintaining that he's not on social media, that he doesn't use social media, and he said so. He says, a lot of people are spouting a lot of things about me on Twitter, said Fauci to Fox News here. This was on a media report. I've never had a Twitter account. I don't intend on having a Twitter account. I've had nothing to do with Twitter, so I don't know what they're talking about when they say all that, says Fauci. So he is the high priest of the pandemic. But look at this here. This is the transcript here. Okay. So he said, I don't tweet. I don't pay attention to social media. I wouldn't know how to access a tweet if you paid me, says Fauci. Well, it turns out, yes, he is getting paid, and he does know how to access a tweet because look at this. But internal Twitter report from March 2021, the company revealed that Dr. Anthony Fauci did an account takeover of, get this, the WHO COVID response. Fauci himself took over that Twitter account. So this runs contrary to Fauci's public statements, sworn depositions, given a latest one on November.
Alleges Russia has compromising information on Trump. The allegations are unverified and the report contains errors, they say, but nonetheless, they ran it and that story blew up massively. So
it not just blew up, it triggered FISA warrants, spying on American citizens, spying on the Trump campaign. It triggered a whole series of events. It opened the floodgates for Russiagate.
Now, BuzzFeed News, Vanessa, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on this, but BuzzFeed News, of course, won a Pulitzer Prize for covering Xinjiang.
Yeah, of course they did. And I can imagine what their coverage of Xinjiang was. Let me guess.
Yeah,
wall-to-wall VOC propaganda.
That's absolutely.
And VOC, if people remember, were the Nazi-founded Victims of Communism organization post-Second World War, founded to fight back against the Red Devils. So, not surprised.
So that's Uyghur genocide, right?
That's
filed
100%.
under the heading of Uyghur genocide.
Yes. So let's bring Noah Peretti, who's the head of BuzzFeed, on. So BuzzFeed, of course, the parent of BuzzFeed News. So it's just BuzzFeed News that's going here, not BuzzFeed in its entirety. He said, we faced more challenges than I can count in the past few years: a pandemic, a fading SPAC market that yielded less capital, a tech recession, a tough economy, a declining stock market, a decelerating digital advertising market, and ongoing audience and platform shifts.
And terrible journalism at BuzzFeed.
He's not mentioning that.
That's something to do with it, doesn't it?
But what, right? So it's already causing calls, because the question is, how do we as a society support so-called independent journalism? Because BuzzFeed is apparently an independent journalistic outlet. I wouldn't have thought so, but anyway.
Well, they seem to be, right?
The calls are already asking for more government support for independent journalism.
Wow.
And this is just such a dangerous thing if we're heading in that direction.
Okay, look.
We've already got a mainstream press which is utterly co-opted by government and effectively financed by government funding. And
So let's talk about this independent journalistic outlet, shall we, Mike? BuzzFeed got 2 rounds of $200 million each from NBC Universal, massive global media conglomerate. Okay, 2 rounds of $200 million, bunch of other funding rounds. So they've burned through something probably upwards of $750 million since they came on the scene recently. So, like, where do you draw the line on this? So, BuzzFeed is running an operation that is totally unsustainable. They're paying these hacks incredible salaries, Mike, and they can't really justify it. And now they have to close their doors. Why not just scale it down, hire some real journalists, and run a real news press outlet? But that's not what they're for. They are a propaganda outlet, and they've been, that's why they were founded, to fill the gaps alongside of some of the other ones like Salon. You've got these sort of standard establishment left-wing media outlets. Huffington Post, of course, they've got their whole digital online offering as well. So I don't have any sympathy for BuzzFeed. And how long until Vice News is going to be following in their footsteps? But Vice has also got hundreds of millions of dollars, including the seed funding of $17 million from News Corp, from Rupert Murdoch.
Yeah.
And they're supposed to be a left-wing outlet. Figure that one out.
Yeah.
So, it's going to be very interesting. So I hope their archive's going to be preserved in perpetuity, Mike, so we could read all the Steele dossier articles in the future. Teach our children about fake news.
Indeed. Okay, let's correct the mistake we made at the beginning of the program, Patrick, and get onto this story. Ex-CIA chief spills on how he got spies to write false Hunter Biden laptop letter.
Oh yeah, there he is, Michael Morell, former acting CIA director under Barack Obama, who's got a podcast and everything, and he is probably one of the biggest hacks right now in the whole sort of national security intelligentsia. So this is the New York Post reporting this here. This is incredible. So let's look at how this story, during the 2020 elections, when the Hunter Biden laptop story came out, Trump challenged Biden during a presidential debate right before the election. And Biden said straight to the American people, straight to Trump's face, no, that's Russian disinformation. And I've got 50 intelligence professionals that'll swear by that. And so Michael Morell was the guy who put all that together. Let's look at the clip, though. Turn back the clock and watch this.
Russia, Ukraine, China, other countries, Iraq. If this is true, then he's a corrupt politician.
Right.
So don't give me the stuff about how you're this innocent baby. Joe, they're calling you a corrupt politician.
Nobody. President Trump, I want to stay on the issue of race. We're talking about the issue.
Laptop from hell.
President Trump, we're talking about race right now, and I do want to stay on the issue of race. President Trump,
I have to respond to that.
Please,
because look,
very quickly.
There are 50 former national intelligence folks who said that what he's accusing me of is a Russian plan. They have said that this has all the 5 former heads of the CIA, both parties, say what he's saying is a bunch of garbage. Nobody believes it except his and his good friend Rudy Giuliani.
You mean the laptop is now another Russia hoax?
That's exactly what.
Is this where you're going? This is where he's going. The laptop is Russia.
Gentlemen, I want to stay on the issue of race.
You have to be kidding. Here we go again with Russia.
We're going to continue on the issue of.
Oh dear.
Arguably one of the most entertaining presidential debates in history. So that was Biden's party line. That helped Biden get elected.
Right.
Okay. And we find out that actually it was Joe Biden himself and his people that were pushing and used Morell to create this letter. Let's look at how this shapes up. So this is a pretty amazing bombshell. These are the people railing against disinformation. I just want to remind you of that here. So the New York Post story here, 50 intelligence experts say it's Russian disinformation. That's what happened. There's Michael Morell. Let's take a closer look at this. How did this story break? Let's look at this. So we find out Antony Blinken, the current U.S. Secretary of State, reached out to Morell. This is before the election, October 17th, 3 days before the New York Post published the Hunter Biden emails about his Ukrainian business partner and the connections to his father, who was Joe Biden, Hunter's father at the time. So, and they're saying at 10:53 p.m., the night of the call, Blinken emailed Morell a USA Today article claiming the FBI was examining whether Hunter Biden's laptop was part of a disinformation campaign. And that was the trigger that gave him the justification, there's Morell, to go forward with this. Morell said he did a little bit of his own internet research, Googling and whatnot, and then reached out to retired CIA former operatives and officers and asked for their assistance in compiling a letter discrediting the Post's reporting on Hunter Biden's laptop. And that was also used as the basis for Twitter banning the story as well. Okay, so Morell then gathered signatures from 51 intelligence officials, including himself and 4 other former CIA directors. Very important. So that's the appeal to authority, fallacious argument there in action. And so how did this end up? It ended up like this. So Nick Shapiro, he's a former deputy chief of staff for John Brennan, former CIA director, then took the letter to Politico, which then published it on October 19th, just 2 days after that, under the headline, Hunter Biden's story is Russian disinfo. Dozens of former officials say so. The letter allegedly says the Post story has all the classic earmarks of a Russian information operation. So every other media outlet then took that and ran with that as their story. So that's how propaganda works. So you're seeing in action here. So Tony Blinken was behind this. So he was on the Biden team as well. So this came from Joe Biden. And then the general feeling on this is that Joe Biden wanted this to happen in order to basically kill the story and help him win the election. So is this not election interference or disinformation? All these things that they accuse everyone else of doing, that's what they've done here. Another example. How many more of these horrible exhibits do we need?
Indeed, good question. Right, let's move to France now, Vanessa. And will the protests continue?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is extraordinary footage of the French protesters. This is predominantly against the new the hike in the retirement age. And here you have the protesters actually storming the Paris Stock Exchange, Euronext. And of course, a couple of weeks ago, I think they stormed BlackRock. So it does appear that these French protesters against general austerity laws being brought in under Macron's very much globalist influence government are pretty savvy about the heart of the beast that they're attacking. Let's have a look at the video. I mean, really extraordinary scenes. I mean, Macron, I don't know, he must be, I think now in the record books as the most hated French president in history, actually. But this is also taken from a translation of an article in Le Monde, which appeared, first of all, in the Officiel Journal, official journal, decree authorizing the use of drones by the police in France in certain cases, published in official journal. Authorizes the use of drones by police, gendarmes, customs, or military in some cases for prevention of damage to the safety of people, etc. So this is basically the text of a law that was passed about a year ago, and interesting that it's now suddenly been brought into effect with the increase of the protests pretty much across all of France against Macron's austerity laws and changes in legislation. So it authorizes the use of drones by police, gendarmes, customs, or military for prevention of attacks on the safety of people and goods in places particularly exposed, for assembly security on public roads, as well as support agents on the ground to enable them to maintain or restore public order, prevention of acts of terrorism, regulation of transport flows, border surveillance in order to combat their irregular crossing, and help for people. Are there other situations where law enforcement officials can use these small remote-controlled aircraft? That sounds very much like military law to me.
Well, quite possibly. Now, I wanted to get your thoughts on the story of the French publisher arrested on earlier in the week, on Monday. This is Ernest Morel. If you remember, we covered this on Wednesday's program. He, if you remember, was approached by two plainclothes police at St Pancras Station on Monday evening after arriving by train from Paris. He was arrested following 6 hours of questioning for alleged obstruction and refusing to disclose passcodes to his phone and computer. His phone and computer were seized by police. They remain in police custody. And then he was released on bail. He will have to return to London in May. Now, we showed a little bit of the response from the publisher itself on Wednesday's programme. Here's a little bit more for you. Perhaps more seriously, they said during his interrogation, he was asked to name the anti-government authors in the catalogue of the publishing house La Fabrique, for which he works. None of these questions should be relevant to a British police officer. And so the questions continue as to why this happened in Britain. Now, if you remember, if we focus, I just want to focus a little bit more on this whole business of being asked to disclose passcodes and passkeys for phones and for laptops and so on. This comes from Schedule 7 of the Terrorism Act 2000, a national security port and border power, the government says. Now, of course, this removes your right to silence and the right to not incriminate yourself because you're required to give up your encryption keys. And I was wondering, Vanessa, whether this was a case of the French government asking the British to intervene here because we have that legislation in place. What's the situation in France? Well, it turns out that in November last year, the courts decided that, in fact, refusing to disclose your phone password would now be a criminal act. So this article saying the refusal to communicate the unlocking code of a mobile phone can constitute an offence. Judges in the Court of Cassation, the action was called upon to rule on a drug trafficking case in which a court of appeal had acquitted a suspect who refused to give the unlock code for his two telephones, despite the case law of the Court of Cassation. So anyway, that was effectively made illegal. But there is another piece of legislation, and that is the Article 30 of the Law 2001-1062 on community safety. This allows a judge or a prosecutor to compel a qualified person to decrypt or surrender keys to make available any information encountered in the course of an investigation. So that seems like a much harder process in France. You've got to go to court. You've got to get a court order from a judge before you can compel someone, whereas in the UK, the terrorism police can just lift you and compel you on the spot. And if you don't, then you're taken to court and face fines. Now in France, the failure to comply is 3 years jail time and a fine of 45,000 euros. But if it turns out at the end of the day that compliance would have guaranteed or would have prevented a crime, then the penalty is 5 years in prison and a 75,000 euro fine. So in both countries, we have this similar legislation, but in the UK, it seems easier to sort of cause problems for people or to compel the requirement to give up a passcode. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on the arrest of this guy. And because the reason I'm interested is because this happened to you not so long ago.
Yeah, I was just going to say. And I mean, what's extraordinary, yes, I recognize the 6 hours detention because that's the maximum they can hold you for questioning, right? When I came off the plane and they stopped me, I said to them I wasn't going to give them my mobile phone. I wasn't going to hand anything over to them. And they then told me, yes, well, if I didn't give them the passwords, I was liable to prosecution. And they can forcibly take the phone from me anyway. So it's better to comply with them. But I mean, it's quite extraordinarily intrusive that someone who simply took part in legitimate protests or has written about, from an opposition perspective to the French government can be picked up on British soil in this way. I mean, it's quite extraordinary the lengths to which they're going to now and how brazen it is, this campaign to prevent dissent from almost any quarter. It's extraordinary. And I think, yes, probably he was picked up in the UK, although I don't know if there has to be some kind of treaty between the UK and France for them to be able to do that. It seems strange because UK is no longer part of the EU. So under what laws does that fall? Unless, of course, they're simply picking him up under the anti-terrorism pretext.
That's exactly what it was. It was under the anti-terrorism pretext.
But the European arrest warrant is still recognized, even though
it is. But that wasn't invoked in this case. But my point is that
terrorism against who, Mike? Because it has to be surely terrorism against the UK. It can't be terrorism against France. I mean, what was the threat to the UK? You have to explain
that is a very good point. Yes, that is a very good point. So where does that take us?
Well, it takes us to a journalist being detained for attending a protest in Britain, a French journalist attending a French protest being arrested under anti-terror laws in Britain. And his publishers come out with the statements. I think the NUJ, National Union of Journalists in the UK, has also said they're very concerned about this. And let's just kind of put this in context while this is happening. We have this situation which is still unresolved. 4 years held in a Category A maximum security prison, HM Belmarsh in southeast London, Julian Assange. And he is unconvicted. It's been 4 years this month. So awaiting supposedly extradition to the United States. So I just think that's worth reminding people that this is a grave injustice to an award-winning journalist, an award-winning publication, WikiLeaks, that somehow became an enemy of the state, and he's being stitched up at the moment. But guess what? There's a lot of legal eagles that are lining up and desperate to get a hold of this case. It's never been challenged. The Espionage Act has never properly been challenged in relation to journalism before. And all the experts, Mike, including Bruce Afrin here, said this is almost a slam dunk for Julian Assange. Now, that's not going to be easy in a national security court in Virginia here, but he's pointing out the obvious. Assange is being prosecuted, at least in part, as retaliation for speech. And that is a protected right in America under the First Amendment. The government charges that WikiLeaks publishes U.S., quote, rules of engagement in Iraq, but WikiLeaks says it released these only after the U.S. defended the collateral murder video by claiming that the killings were within the laws of war and the rules of engagement. So it's very clear, as a journalistic outlet, they did what they felt was in the public interest. Mm-hmm. And I don't think anybody's going to argue that wasn't in the public interest. Government hasn't proved its case that this put anyone at danger. So, and they finish off here. So all this was of intense public interest and well within the bounds of journalism, and to use the undefined contours of the Espionage Act, which is almost over 100 years old, piece of legislation, essentially, to prosecute Julian Assange in this way certainly smacks of retaliation for protected First Amendment activity. That's the main point. And I think this is what a lot of people are realizing. This might be why you could see his case potentially take an interesting turn in the near future to save off the political embarrassment of trying to basically enforce the Espionage Act against the First Amendment and journalism here. And also in Australia, there's a lot of pressure right now on the Albanese government, Mike, to make a move on this. Now, Penny Wong, their foreign minister, has made some very unsavory comments about this here. But activists here, the campaign to free Julian Assange has urged Prime Minister Anthony Albanese to boost its efforts to negotiate the WikiLeaks founder's release when the government meets the U.S. and the U.K. next month to discuss the AUKUS deal. Now, I'm going to say, Mike, fat chance that that's going to happen at the AUKUS deal. But what's interesting is the activists are very focused. You can see they're lining themselves up with the meetings of governments, and the geopolitical scope is also included in this. To me, this is interesting because now journalists have to report this and they have to put things in context. Something that mainstream journalists hate doing is putting things in context. So I'm very encouraged by the Australian activists on this. It looks like they're stepping their game up a little bit for Julian Assange. Okay, back to the UK then, and inflation. And the Telegraph a day or two ago had this, yesterday in fact, this article, "The Bank of England's ineptitude has become humiliating." And I just wanted to highlight a little bit of this. This is Ben Marlow, who's the chief city commentator in the Telegraph. Whether it's Andrew Beeley and the Monetary Policy Committee, the Federal Reserve, or Christine Lagarde, these figures were all seen by most experts as people who can do no wrong.
The markets hang on their every word. Their speeches are pored over for the slightest change in phrase, as though they aren't mere mortals, but real-life wizards waving a magic wand over the global economy. But the truth is, they're nothing of the sort, and it only takes a dispassionate look at the track record of the world's preeminent central bankers to see that these unelected, unaccountable officials have made a litany of mistakes. Even worse, they've fessed up to none of them. So this is all about inflation, of course. And it's interesting to see the Telegraph, traditionally a supporter of the City of London, the Bank of England, seeming to attack in this way.
They left out Janet Yellen off that list too, which is pretty shocking.
Indeed. But this wasn't the only sort of, shall we say, recognition that it was monetary policy from the powers that be that has caused the inflationary process at the moment, and perhaps not so much wars in Ukraine and other things, and Russia in particular. But let's look at Andrew Sentence here, who's a former Monetary Policy Committee member. So he used to help set the interest rates at the Bank of England, and he was giving evidence to the Treasury Select Committee a couple of days ago. And he said, we had this long period of extremely low interest rates and further injections of quantitative easing after the immediate problems and the financial crisis have passed. That all, I think, has contributed over a period of time to the inflationary pressures that we're seeing now. It did seem that quantitative easing went on for too long. We had more than a doubling of the amount of QE during the pandemic, and it wasn't clear that this was the appropriate policy at all. So he's absolutely coming out against, we'll come on to that in a second. He's coming out against QE and using very similar explanation to that David Scott has given over the last number of weeks. So it's interesting to see somebody like that making these comments. And Patrick was just about to comment on his badge. If we put it back on the screen for a second.
That beautiful, lovely lapel. What is that? It's blue and yellow.
Yes.
Isn't it? What does that signify? Maybe he's sending a subliminal message as to why the inflation is running out of control.
Maybe he is. While he's saying one thing, he's hinting at another. But let's just remind ourselves what government policy is on this, because Jeremy Hunt said this a couple of days ago. We have a plan, and we're going to reduce the pressure on families. It's absolutely essential we stick to that plan, and we see it through so that we have inflation this year, as the Prime Minister has promised. And what I really wanted to make the point here is that this is not going to reduce pressure on families at all. Remember, inflation is a measure of a rate of change. It's showing how much or how quickly prices are rising. If inflation falls from its current 10.1% back to 2%, even if it did that overnight, that would not cause prices to fall. That only means that prices aren't rising as quickly as they did before.
It's like the dead cat bounce, right?
Exactly. So the point is, the pressure that people are facing at the moment doesn't get relieved by having inflation at the end of this year or by the end of this year. All that means is that the pressure isn't increasing just as quickly as it did before.
Oh, you say that, Mike, but they're all going to be crowing about the great job they did when inflation reduces, but it's still running out of control. They'll take credit for it, won't they?
Yes, they will. Now, I wanted to bring a lady on screen. Here she is. This is a tweet from Windsor Police in Canada. This is Toronto, a region of an area of Toronto, and they produced a news release as a result of an effort to find this lady. And now we may say she's got some stubble there.
That's no lady, Mike.
Indeed, it's a bloke. So let's have a look and see what happened. Update: the suspect in this incident has turned themselves into the police. We want to thank the public for their support, for sharing our post. Our help in spreading the word, your help in spreading the word played a crucial role in bringing about a resolution. So what happened here? Well, let's look at the press release. Here it is, and what they say. So on the 4th of April 2023, a female victim contacted the police to report that she'd been sexually assaulted while staying at a Windsor women's shelter. The suspect, who was also residing in the shelter at the time, allegedly climbed into the victim's bed and sexually assaulted her. So, Vanessa, what we have here is that the authorities in Windsor and Toronto decided that the best thing they could do was to put this trans person into a women's shelter, where he then sexually assaulted a genuine female in that shelter. And I just got to ask, when is this insanity going to end?
I have no idea, but it is. It'd be interesting to look at the figures of sexual assault since the whole kind of trans movement aspect was brought into play more heavily, and see if there has been an increase. I would kind of bet quite a large amount of money that there has been.
Yes.
Go back to the
You want to go back to
rap
the
sheet. That
yes.
Desiree Anderson, otherwise known as Cody Detremont,
Yes.
the French Canadian. Desiree Anderson. You got to give full marks for the creativity on the name. This is just ridiculous.
It is.
This is really ridiculous.
Well, look, we're just about at the end for today, but I want to remind everybody that on Sunday at 3 p.m., we, of course, are going to be testing, or the government is going to be testing its emergency alert system across the UK. 3 p.m., that's going to be taking place. Just wanted to remind everybody that if you've got an iPhone, which is running iOS earlier than 14.5, or if you're running an Android phone that's running Android 10 or before, then you don't need to worry because they're too old to be bothered with it. But if you want to opt out, then you need to get into your settings. It's pretty much the same process whether you're using an iPhone or an Android phone. You get into your settings, you look for emergency alerts and severe alerts and switch it off, and away you go.
Okay.
But at 3 p.m. on 3 p.m., Patrick's just decided to go and have a look to see what he can do.
All right. Okay.
At 3 p.m. on Sunday, hopefully, if you're watching the Alternative View live stream with us on Sunday, you will not hear anybody's phones going off during that.
I'm torn whether to disable it or just to see what it's like.
Yes.
I don't know, because I sort of want to know what it's like. I kind of know what it's going to be like. It's going to go
Sort of. We did show a little video clip with an example of what it's going to sound like. But if you're vulnerable, likely to have a heart attack, or driving your car, probably best to switch your phone off or put it in airplane mode at 3 p.m. on Sunday, and then you won't be bothered.
Yeah, if you're suffering from free-floating anxiety from all the fear-mongering news that everybody's putting out, you might want to disable it. If not, then it should be a nice
bit of fun.
A nice bit of fun at the pub on Saturday.
Yeah, Sunday, 3 p.m.
Oh, Sunday.
Sunday.
Okay.
Yes. All right. We will be back. Well, if you're watching the Alternative View live stream on Sunday, we'll see you there. But otherwise,
St. George's Day is this weekend. It's tomorrow, isn't it?
Is it?
I think so.
What?
St. George's Day. This is the British holiday, right? This is number one. Pretty much.
Vanessa?
Can I just say Eid Mubarak, as Patrick said at the beginning, to all everyone in Syria and to all Muslim friends worldwide.
Okay, so
we've got Eid and St. George's Day falling at the same time. That's fantastic.
Excellent. So excellent. Right, we'll be back in a couple of minutes for some extra. Otherwise, Sunday for AV live stream and Monday for UK Column News again. We'll see you then. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.